I had the chance recently to sit down and chat with George Kalajian. George is the owner and CEO of Tom's Sons International Pleating, which is a five-generation family-owned professional pleating business in the heart of the New York fashion district. So George not only works with clients ranging from both big name fashion people to individual home stores like you and me. He not only works with them to professionally pleat fabric, but he also works with them in the overall design and consultation process with bringing, a sketch or a concept for a garment into reality. So he not only does the pleating, but he actually consults with them about how to create the garments of their dreams and to bring their visions into beautiful physical reality. And as I said, I got the chance to sit down and chat with him today and to ask him many questions about professional pleating and how it can be useful to home sewers like you and me. And so, part one will be focused more on that, learning more about professional pleating. And then, part two is going to be actually consulting with him about the design process for my own vintage inspired dream skirt. And that video will be coming out next week, so stay tuned. Okay, so let's jump into the chat with George and see what we can learn about professional pleating. So, International Pleating is a company that does professional pleating. And if you are anything like me, you might not have even known that this was a thing. But of course, if we look around at all of the fashion on the runway and in shows, you'll see that there's often a whole lot of very technical, very beautiful pleats that could have really only been done by an expert. And George is just that expert. So Tom's Sons International Pleating has worked with a whole lot of big names in the fashion world: Oscar de la Renta, Calvin Klein, Coach, the costume department of the Metropolitan Museum, Dior USA, Banana Republic, Kate Spade, Club Monaco. They've also designed a costume for the movie It, Stephen King's It, as well as the Gilded Age show, Downton Abbey, just a whole lot of big names, big shows. So I'm going to turn it over to you, George, and you can talk a little more about what you do, and then we'll get chatting about pleating and professional pleating and how it can help my audience.
I am the fifth generation in the fashion industry. About 3 generations ago, we switched over from being a textile manufacturer to becoming sewing and as well as pleating. And we say that we started pleating in 1931, which is when my grandmother first actually professionally sold pleating. Ever since then, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 92, 93 years right now. But during that time, most of those years, we only pleated for ourselves, meaning that we created the garment, we designed it, created it, sold it, distributed it, the whole 9 yards. And as a result of doing the entire process, my family developed an entire technology around not just what is pleating or how do you make pleating, but how do you use pleating in your garment? How do you use it effectively, so that it looks beautiful and dramatic, but also so that you don't have any production nightmares. So when you're making one garment, it's a total different methodology or psychology as opposed to scaling and making either dozens or hundreds or thousands. And so because we've made so much clothing and designed so much, that's why we have grown to the top of our industry here in New York City and internationally as well, because we do help designers make it as effectively and aesthetically as possible while it costing the minimal amount of money. That being said, we don't only work just with big designers. We always work with students, and actually we love working with students or your average home sewer, wherever they may be, who might be, we've had grandmothers that have made the wedding dress for their granddaughter. So we have a full gamut of people that we service. So we don't discriminate whether your name is in flashing lights on 7th Avenue. My long-winded response to your question.
No, that wasn't long-winded. I think that's great to know, because up until meeting you, I sort of had the impression that I think a lot of people like me have, that there's very like there's these two separate worlds of like home sewers versus, you know, the fashion industry as a whole and the companies that serve the fashion industry. And I would have always thought that those people, companies that serve the fashion industry, only like working with big names or people who have a lot of garments they want to make all at once. And so it's really helpful to know that we can consult with someone like you to get technical help on making our garments and to also achieve this beautiful pleating in our garments.
Yes, and it wasn't always that way. I mean, if you went back probably 40 years ago, like 70s, 80s,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a contractor here in the garment center would not have time to deal with you because there was so much work and
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't deal with that. But as this whole China transition occurred, where all these offshore manufacturing occurred, the people that make a higher quality product have been only the ones that have been able to sustain themselves. I should say medium to high end. You know, the
Yeah.
people that are selling stuff on Amazon, you know, that those garments are literally like pennies of margin.
Mm-hmm.
So those guys are all gone. So
Right.
because people like us are here, we totally are more than happy to help anyone who wants to do something. You know, I mean, there isn't the garment industry here in America is actually kind of an endangered species and on
Mm-hmm.
the verge of kind of extinction. So
Right. Do you see that changing at any point, or if it is going to change, what do you see as the necessary things that have to change to make the garment industry in America survive?
so I hope it will change, and I was waiting for things to change, and government was government has been trying to step in, but you know, I don't really see it as being super effective. I think what needs to occur is that the population of America need to be told that,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you should buy something that's made in the USA.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and while those garments are usually more expensive, for the long haul, it doesn't have to be. You know what I mean? If
Mm-hmm.
people would just kind of like, you know, pull up their bootstraps and pay for something that was made in this country, eventually the prices would drop. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's simple economy of scale. You know, the more I make, the price would drop.
Yeah, and then it's also, I think people have gotten this false idea of how much clothing should cost based
Right.
on the fast fashion industry.
Very good point.
Um, I deal with this all the time in a sense, not that I have yet made clothing for sale, and it's not because I haven't had people ask me, it's because I usually just don't even want to deal with it because I know that 99% of people who say, "Hey, I want a custom corset," aren't going to be willing to actually pay what it would be worth in terms of the materials and also the immense amount of time that goes into it. And I think that's because people have just become very biased towards thinking that fashion should be very cheap and a
Correct.
lot cheaper than the cost of people's time and the materials, really. So, yeah,
Correct. You're
yeah,
absolutely right. I mean, I think people need to do like they need to shift mentally, you know. I mean, I'm sure if you made more than one corset at a time, and that doesn't mean mass produced, you know. I mean, if you do something in gang, obviously
mhm,
when you do something, you're switching how do you say? You're switching functions, and
yeah,
when you switch the function, there's time that goes into it. So
hmm,
if you made corsets in 5 or 10 at a time in batches of 5 or 10, the amount of time it takes you to switch gears would actually be giving you maybe 2, 3, 4 additional corsets, depending on how much time the setup was.
that's right.
So this is what I hope that people realize, like, don't buy something crappy. You know, why are you going to buy something that you can wear one time? Buy
Hmm.
something that was made very well and
Yeah,
that will last you your entire life and potentially even be handed down. You know what I mean? Like, look at
yeah,
all the vintage clothing now. I mean,
exactly.
they totally don't make things the way they used to. I can totally attest to that. I
Yeah,
look at garments that are made today and I'm like, it's their total slap job. So
yeah,
once people realize and catch on that, you know, ultimately, if you have to buy 8 corsets to your one corset, for it to last a long time, I mean, it all ends up working out in the wash. I mean,
It's
it's
true.
funny that I'm saying that because now clothing literally one time in the wash and it's pretty much destroyed.
It's wrecked.
Yeah, it's wrecked.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a beautiful long green, dark green trench coat that actually was my grandmother's,
Oh,
and it's
really?
a pretty cool story around it because my grandma and my grandpa and my mom and their whole family immigrated to Canada, Toronto specifically. I think in the 80s, yeah, in the 80s. And so when they came to Toronto, she knew she was going to need a coat, and so she had this coat custom made for her in the garment district of Toronto.
Really?
And I remember my mom told me that at the time she was like, "Oh wow, this is so expensive," because she was used to the prices in Brazil. But I still have it. Like I'm her
Wow.
granddaughter, like 40 plus years later,
Wow.
and it's still in perfect condition.
I
And it's
believe
like
it.
the nicest coat I've ever had. So
I believe it. I believe
yeah.
it. I totally believe it. Coats are a total art form. I knew a woman whose father used to be the presser in a coat factory, and all he would do is press the sleeves of the coats, and he had the most senior job. That was the most important thing.
Wow. Well, yeah, sleeve pressing is pretty technical. I've
Totally.
been learning about that in the book I told you about, the tailoring, vintage couture tailoring. The sleeves are like the one make or break it sort of
Pretty
part
much.
of
Pretty
it.
much. Pretty much.
Okay, so I'd like to touch on specifically what it looks like when you're working with individuals on a smaller scale to do pleating for them or to help them design a garment. What does that look like? And who is your typical sort of client at this point?
So our clients totally range. High
Okay.
school students, grandmas, hobbyists, I mean, there is no, I mean, we've seen it all. We've tried to make it as standardized as possible in the sense that you first need to let us know what kind of pleating you want, because people start asking us questions. What do I do? How do I do the? And it really depends on the style of pleating. So
Right.
we normally guide people. We normally guide people to our website to go to our custom pleating page, and there is a gallery there where they can kind of choose and isolate what style of pleating they need.
Mm-hmm.
Once they've isolated that, and they're like, okay, this is what I think, then they will fill out this order form we have. It's a very long order form. It's called an order form checklist, and it just makes them do a brain dump of everything that they know that could potentially affect our project, their project,
Mm-hmm.
and then they submit that to us. And there's questions on there like, did you pick your fabric already? Do you know what kind you want? How long will your skirt be? What's the measurements? Are you cutting it or are we cutting it? And then, we set up a 15-minute interview or a consultation with them, and that's usually enough time. Once we have all of the data, it doesn't take us long to figure out what the next steps are.
Okay.
And we tell them, we just say, okay, hey, who's doing it? Your seamstress is doing it. If the seamstress is doing it, then we basically like to get their seamstress involved. It gets too technical and the person can't really understand what we're asking of them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the customer will be like, hey, listen, can you just do it and just give it so that the seamstress can bolt it into the dress? And we're like, okay, good. You deal with the top half, we'll deal with the bottom half. Don't worry about it. And that's usually the way it works. And we have the ability to do the minimal amount of work for the client or the maximum amount of work. I mean, we've had people that have hired us to make custom skirts for them, custom gowns. I mean, I made my wife's wedding dress, so
Oh wow.
we have the ability to do anything. And we give that option to our customer. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they want to do the most amount of work. The project is really about them doing the most. We'll guide them along the way and tell them what needs to be done so that they're successful.
Right. So when you're guiding people about these technical aspects, does that usually have to do with like the pattern cutting or with how much fabric they're going to need or with the construction of the
All,
garment? All
all,
of it? All
all
of
of
it.
it, all of it. Whatever you need, we'll do it for them. Everybody is unique. Like I said, we've had people that have just been like very plain and simple, like they have experience
Mm-hmm.
and I'll know what they've done. They're like, I've made skirts, I've made dresses, and I'll be like, okay, so the only thing that changes with this particular project is blah blah blah. So you got to do this, hit a stitch, do some shearing, stick it in the waistband. And they're like, oh, okay, that's easy. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. If you know what you're doing, it's easy. It doesn't have to be
Right.
difficult.
Right. So, what types of fabrics work best for professional pleating? And how often do you help clients actually like select what type of fabric that they should be using for a given project?
The best fabrics, it really depends on what's the application. And I usually, for me, it's basically two options. Polyester, if you want to wear it a lot and put some mileage on it,
Mm-hmm.
because you can just hand wash it in cold water, hang it up, let it drip dry, and you're good. Okay,
Right.
nothing will happen to the pleats.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that there's nothing constructed in the garment that will be an issue with the water. So if your lining is polyester also, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
I usually recommend polyester for those situations. And then if it's a special occasion like a wedding or whatever, bar mitzvah, and the customer is it's all about how amazing they feel, how
Mm-hmm.
good the dress looks, then I usually recommend silk.
Silk. Okay.
Yeah, silk, either silk chiffon. Usually it's silk chiffon or silk georgette. Again, it
Mhm.
depends on the style. And then sometimes there's, wools and linens, but wools are more of a sportswear thing, and most of what we do is more in the evening gown arena, you know.
Okay. So the evening gowns would mostly be silk then or poly?
Most of the time they're silk. I would say we do an even amount. I would say we pleat an even amount of silk and polyester for gowns.
Okay. So this brings up a really interesting point that I thought would be great for my audience to hear about, which is sort of what we talked about on our last call together about polyester versus natural fibers. Because me, prior to speaking to you, I was always kind of very anti polyester and sort of had a certain view of polyester as being cheap and like not breathable and sort of low quality and probably inherently bad for the environment. And I think probably a lot of my viewers might have those same beliefs that they're bringing to this conversation. So, can I hear your thoughts about polyester and sort of how it doesn't necessarily fit into that mold?
Polyester is not a dirty word. So, yes, polyesters really got a bad rap in I think it was what, the 50s, 60s, 70s, something like that, when everything was just whatever, cheap, cheap
Yeah.
polyester. Polyester's come a long way. Now, I can't speak to the environmental aspect of polyester. I mean, I think that the environmental aspect, really, if you think about anything, is really specific to the individual company. A company could be dealing with natural fibers and be very abusive either to the animals or the staff or the environment, but taking that part of it out of the conversation, the quality of polyester has significantly taken a huge turn and advanced considerably. Um, to date, the most expensive fabric that I have ever worked on is a polyester. It
Okay.
was a polyester that was the thinnest fiber that can be possibly considered a fiber. It was
Wow.
that fiber. It was woven in the most lightweight way,
Hmm.
and it was washed in a metal. It was washed in a bronze metal to give it like this bronze metallic
Wow.
feel,
Hmm.
and then it was laser printed. There was a print printed on one side with laser printing, where you could see the print on one side, but on the other side you could not see the print,
Wow.
which is totally trippy. I never had a chance to investigate that technology and see how that works. And
Yeah.
that fabric came to us. It was for a movie. It was for a movie called The Gods of Egypt. And that
Okay.
fabric came to us And it was for the not the main character, the co-host. I forgot, she was some goddess, and she wore this crazy, beautiful, fluid cape, and that was the whole purpose of them choosing this fabric. Anyway, that
Okay.
fabric was, I think, $500 or $600 a yard.
Wow.
So yeah, so it was, and we had to wear white gloves when we were
Wow.
touching it, because the oil from our fingers would actually oxidize the bronze that it was washed.
Wow.
It was actual metal.
Wow.
Anyway, long story short, that fabric felt amazing, super lightweight, and many other polyesters I have felt where I've actually had to do a double take, where I'm like, usually if I feel fabric, I can immediately tell, is it silk, is it poly,
Mhm.
is it some other synthetic? And these sometimes these fabrics that I've actually felt have been like, wait a minute, oh wow, and I've been like, wow, that's pretty impressive.
Wow.
Usually, it's the Japanese that have achieved that level of perfection
Okay.
when it comes to polyester.
I can imagine
And I
that.
would say that the cost of these fabrics wholesale to me are could be in excess of, $30, $40 a yard, which would
Wow.
mean that if it was retailed, you're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 a yard.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, and you have to order thousands of yards, whatever. They're very hard to come by
Hmm.
because there isn't, you have to think of it from this perspective. If you're making something super expensive, more times than not, it's going to be silk, you know? So there's a very small niche market for it. Not many people want a luxury item that is polyester, you
Of
know?
course. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so when they're made, I mean, think about it. You even said it, like most people think, polyester. But if you walk into a store and you saw a polyester that costs more than a silk, you're like, who's the crazy person that put that price tag on it?
Right.
But when it comes to something like pleating, obviously that's a win-win, because that garment will last forever. So
Mhm.
if you think about that from the environmental aspect, you make one amazing pleated skirt and it lasts you 40 years. I mean,
Yes, that's what I was going to say is another consideration is that if you're making a pleated garment and it's poly and like you said, it can last 100 years versus, something silk or cotton or wool or linen and you throw it in the wash one time by accident and then the pleats are gone or
correct,
the fabric can wear out quicker. um, then it has to be made again, essentially. And
correct,
like you said, it comes down to the individual fabric manufacturers and how ecologically friendly they are as well.
correct,
So yeah, there's a lot more nuance to the conversation than I had
correct,
previously thought about.
correct, correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I have garments that literally my father made 45 years ago that
Yeah.
look pristine. I have skirts that my grandmother pleated 60 years ago that are they're wool.
Wow.
They're totally fine. I have
Wow.
them all stored in our archives, because sometimes I go back and I look at them, and to get inspiration or see how my grandmother or how my dad sewed something. Uh, so I keep them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. The multi-generational aspect of it, the fact that you've all been doing the same thing and refining it and you can look back on your
Correct.
grandmother's work. That's pretty amazing.
Yes, I
Wow.
consider myself to be very privileged from that perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start bringing the conversation around to this dream skirt that I want to make for myself. I have a few vague ideas and we're going to look at some photos in a few minutes here. But something that we should touch on that we already sort of alluded to, which is like the care, the different types of aftercare for garments depending on what they're made from. And so for me, I'm a busy mom. I just want to make a skirt that's going to last me for day to day kind of wearing. This is not a formal event dress. This is a skirt that I want to wear and I want it to be as low maintenance as possible and last me as long as possible. So it sounds like you're saying that polyester would probably be the best choice for that, right?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah, because polyester, like you said, you can just wash it at home in cold water, hang dry. Whereas what's the aftercare for, let's say, like a wool or a linen or a cotton pleated skirt?
It depends on the pleat, but basically it's dry clean. You know,
Yeah,
it's dry clean or spot clean, and even that is not a guarantee. I mean, we constantly get skirts that we have to repair from dry cleaners, uh,
yeah,
constantly. And I mean, and oftentimes it's a question of how expensive was the original garment. You know, when we get Valentino or Dior skirts that were, you know, $3,000, $4,000,
oh,
and we tell the customer, you know, hey, it's going to be like $500, $600 to repair this thing. They're like, I don't care, I love it, it's my favorite skirt. But when
mhm,
you tell someone, they're like, this is my favorite skirt, and they're like, they paid $100 for it. Usually I tell people, listen, they go, can you repair it? I'm like, yeah, but you know what, try and buy something if you can. You know, try and find something used or whatever, or buy it again, because it's more difficult to replete something than it is to actually just make the whole skirt all over again, brand new.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine that. So that's another factor where the polyester skirt could actually be more environmentally friendly
Oh,
in this
totally,
area.
totally, totally.
So this is going to be a really sort of dumb question, but I think it's useful to touch on for my audience, which is what is like the biggest difference between just pleating something yourself at home versus having it professionally pleated?
Okay, that's a multi-pronged question. For one thing, let's keep it simple. One is it won't be as accurate, right? And
Oh,
if you want crooked pleats, that's fine. You don't need me. Sometimes people do pay me to make crooked looking pleats. So
okay.
that's one. The second thing is that we have very specialized machinery that would help us uh, really get a good heat setting in the pleating. You know,
Hmm.
we don't use an iron. We use basically giant Instapots that
Wow.
put heat, pressure, and steam, which is calibrated for the particular fabric, and it helps in the setting process.
Hmm.
The other thing is the kind of pleating. So if you just want to make a giant 3-inch box pleat, I mean, you don't really need me because you can set it good enough yourself.
Hmm.
And if it opens up, just repress it by hand and you're safe. And
Okay.
usually when people want to pleat things that are like linens and wools and stuff like that, I tell them, you know, pleat something big enough and something that's flat that you can just press it. Like you're not going to worry about it. But when you
Hmm.
start to get into these little micro types of pleats, you
Hmm.
know, you can't you can't, they won't last, and you can't do them yourself. I mean, I don't know if you see in the behind me, there are
Hmm.
molds behind me, but there are some molds that you just can't, like this is pleated.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do this at home.
No, you can't.
So if you need something like this, you pretty much need a professional pleater.
Yeah, and then I've been looking at your online galleries of the sort of big fancy fashion things that you've pleated for big names in the fashion world, and the ones that really stand out to me are those ones with like many, many layers of very lightweight chiffon, I'm guessing,
Right.
with tons of tiny pleats, and the layers just look so beautiful, and you could not never achieve that at home.
No. I mean,
No.
and it would take you months. What
Yeah.
we could do in a matter of days, I mean, it would take you months. So
Yeah. Yeah.
all depends on how much punishment you want to endure.
Okay, so could you lay out sort of like the main types of pleats that you can do for people? I mean, I know there's probably a whole lot, but
Sure. I'm trying to think how I can show you, because on our website, when you go to custom pleating, there's basically the 8 classic styles of pleating. So I will
Mhm.
say this, there's only 3 ways to fold a piece of fabric. Okay.
Okay.
And that is accordion pleats, which are like this.
Okay.
You got side pleats, which are laying to the side. Some people call them knife pleats.
Mhm.
And then you have box pleats, which are, trying to make it like a heart, but basically, you know, the box pleats.
Mhm.
So that's the only three ways you can fold a piece of fabric. That's it. Okay. Now, there are three basic panel geometries. And what I mean by that is, what is the shape of the fabric before you pleat it? And so you would have something that is straight, like for example, this is considered to be straight because it's a rectangle.
Right.
Okay. Before pleating, it's a rectangle. After pleating, it's just more of a tight rectangle. Okay. The other type is a sunburst, and the sunburst is basically a circle, and all of the pleats all emanate and go towards a center point. So they start at a center point and they emanate out. And then there is another type of a panel, which is called an A-line pleat, which is almost like an amalgamation between the two of them. And that is that the panel starts off as a rectangle, but it's pleated a little bit deeper on the top than the bottom. And what that does is it gets smaller and it kind of comes out and gives it like a nice flare. So when you take those three ways of folding and those three panel shapes and you combine them, you get the 8 classic styles of pleating. So that's how it is. I mean, this picture is on my website. There's also another icon on our website that shows organic pleating, and organic pleating is more of a, there are multiple names for organic pleating. Some people call it fortuny, some people call it mushroom, some people call it tree bark, broomstick, but it all, for us, it all lies under the umbrella of organic looking pleats. And there are multiple ways of doing those types of pleats. So usually when people want that kind of pleating, we tell them to send us a picture and we'll identify what it is and how it was done. And that type of pleating is very similar to your grandmother's apple pie. You know, everyone makes it differently. It all tastes differently. It's not, yes, it's done with, sometimes it's done with the machines, or sometimes the machines assist in the process, but it's still unique settings and dials, and you don't really, one person doesn't tell another person what they do. So
Yeah. Okay. So organic pleating, is that pleating that looks more like it was just happened organically then, as opposed to the very crisp accordion pleats or knife
yes,
pleats? Okay.
yes,
Okay.
that's organic, as in it's all over the place. It is an organic pleated leather.
Oh, wow. That looks beautiful.
Yeah, so this is leather and it's been bonded in the back so that
Okay.
it doesn't open up,
Oh,
because
okay.
leather is ripe for just relaxing as time goes. Like this, I would say this is probably one of the worst things to pleat if you don't bond it. So, but yeah, you can see how the lines are not clear, and basically something that's very crisp. This is a box pleat that was done on a machine. So
Okay.
both of these guys, I don't know if you can see that, but both of these guys were done on a machine. So the settings are different for them. This guy does have baby box pleats in here. And so
Okay.
the baby box pleats with side pleats, they all get distressed and become mishmashy.
Okay, everyone, I really hope that you enjoyed hearing part 1 of this chat that I had with George Kalajian. Make sure you stay tuned for next week, when we will be actually getting down to the nuts and bolts of designing my very own vintage inspired dream skirt, and how we can incorporate beautiful pleats and a beautiful full A-line skirt shape and a beautiful Edwardian inspired yoke into this, dream of bringing this skirt into reality. So stay tuned for next week. I'll see you on the next video.